more behind the book rather than just,
so right.
the story itself. Yeah.
Yes. So thank you everyone for joining in. We are live on YouTube right now. So in our 81st author interaction under Trends Literature series, I'm really pleased to welcome Mr. Vikrant Pandey. He's a full-time author, entrepreneur. I am Bangalore graduate and engineer. He's already spent around 25 years in very large corporations. And he has, till February 2022, published 12 translations from Marathi bestsellers into English. And some of the translations have already made into award-winning movies. He has co-authored the book In the Footsteps of Drama, Travels with Ramayana, and I'm very happy to tell you all it's a travelogue which is being made into a travel serial. So Mr. Pandey, I'll call you Vikrant. I must compliment you on the diverse creative writing. I mean, you've been translating, you've been writing full-time, you've been a professional, but you've got into writing now full-time. And you've also said through translations that one makes sure that the regional literature gets introduced into the world stage of literature. So do you plan to translate your present work into Marathi? Is it going to be the other way around this time?
No, that's difficult. Actually, while my mother tongue is Marathi, but I'm good enough to read Marathi and translate that into English very well, but not the other way around. But yes, I think to answer the question, the SBI book probably should be in multiple languages, because State Bank, I think, is there in every district in India. So, I think people from each state would probably love to read the history in its own language. So that's something which is there in the plans. The top 5 translated languages in India are Marathi, Tamil, Bangla, Telugu, and Hindi. So those 4-5 languages, definitely one we would look at.
No, definitely. And since it's a pan-India, bank, it's so important that everyone reads the trivia and the facts and the whole story about SBI, which you've written in a very good narrative style, and it takes you a while only when you finish the book. And I really recommend everyone that this book has been published by Westland. It is easily available on Amazon, so you must read. So, but how did the interest, develop for? I'm sure you would have been asked this question many times over, but this is something very interesting because this is kind of a very different genre that you really wrote about. I mean, if you look into your background, you've been translating, you wrote on Ramayana. So how come a book on State Bank of India?
So I had translated a book, which is a very detailed biography of the Tatas, which was the Marathi book, which got the best business book award for my translation. And that got me interested in talking about business histories in general because of my background in having worked in large companies. And it was just a serendipitous, article which I read in one of the newspapers, which mentioned that there is a fantastic SBI museum in Kolkata. I was not aware of it. And I went to Kolkata and I actually saw the museum, and I would tell all the listeners and people, especially who are in Kolkata, to actually go and visit the SBI museum on the local head office on One Strand Road, which is next to the Hooghly River. It's a fantastic museum. It reminds one of a European museum, the way it has been lit, the way the artifacts are displayed. And there I was pleasantly surprised to find that not only was the museum curator very helpful and he gave me a lot of, showed me all the archives, but I also found that, and there are 2 people I want to mention, Professor Amiya Kumar Bagchi of Presidency College, and is a very eminent professor of economics, and Mr. Abhik Rai, who headed the history department of SBI. SBI has a history department which has been documenting SBI's history for the past so many years. And thanks to the British, the records have been maintained almost for the past 170, 200 years. So these 2 gentlemen had done phenomenal work in terms of collecting a lot of information, thousands and thousands of pages. And I was very lucky that State Bank of India actually gave me the permission to say that you can access all this material, the archives, talk to people. And for me, it was like, being presented with a lot of treasure and saying that pick up nuggets from here, pick up all the interesting things and make it into a book which is very readable. I wanted to make a book which was which didn't have any jargons, doesn't talk about fiscal policies, monetary policies, and balance sheets and liabilities and things like that. I wanted it to be a story which everybody could enjoy, because there are very few companies in India which can trace its history back to 200 years, 1806 to be precise.
Yes.
And State Bank of India is one of them. Not many people are aware. They always think that State Bank of India probably started in 1955 when it became State Bank. But when you go back, it was, and there were so many fascinating aspects which were there in the voluminous records of the bank. So I thought I should pick up beautiful nuggets. And when you mentioned about the book, there are, I would like to tell the viewer that there are a lot of footnotes in the book which are actually very interesting. So if you read the book, don't miss the footnotes, because they carry some very nice information which normally is not there in most books. So that was my background, in terms of how I got into writing SBI.
I'm sure, because you also felt that people don't know really about the origins of SBI and the story of the 2 centuries that it has been part of our existence, and it's been always there. And as you just mentioned about this book that you translated, The Tatars, How a Family Built a Business and a Nation, I must tell everyone that it got the Best Business Book Award in 2019. So I'm sure that's where your interest to go into that business writing.
In
I'm sure
fact, that book, sorry to interrupt, is also being made into a television serial, The Tata's Book.
That's fantastic. Many, many congratulations for you. So how was the process of writing? I mean, I'm sure it would have been challenging, and how was it from writing the other things that you've written and translations that you've done? So I'm sure there was a lot of research, and you would have worked along with the veterans of the bank. You mentioned a little bit about it a little earlier, but maybe if you could go in a little bit of detail, because I'm sure that'll make it that'll make a lot of people, they'll really come to know about this. Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to put up front, because I know that's a question a lot of people ask, that the book, the SBI story, 2 centuries of banking, is what really talks about. It's very largely a story of 2 centuries. To use a phrase, it's not a critique or a critical analysis of the State Bank of India, because there are a lot of eminent economists, there are a lot of ex-bankers, ex-chairmen of SBI who probably can write about the current affairs of the State Bank they've been there for 40 years to write that. What I was looking at was, people do not know about fantastic stories which the State Bank's origins went through. The presidency banks, the way they treated customers, the way they looked at their employees, the way the Imperial Bank was formed, what kind of clamor went in when SBI was being formed from Imperial Bank, the process of nationalization. Those were a lot of interesting stories which I wanted people to tell, to make people aware of not only the fascinating nuggets in its history. To answer your question specifically, there were 3 or 4 different kinds of materials I used. One was, as I mentioned in the beginning, a lot of voluminous done by Professor Omiya Kumar Bagchi and Avik Rai, who have done phenomenal research in putting a lot of things together and making it into a few thousand pages of information available. There were a lot of stuff in the archives as well, which I looked at. There were a lot of other books on banking, on other banks, some of the books written by on SBI chairman, some of the books on other banks which economists had written earlier. So I looked at a combination of that, and my idea was to write a story of India, a story of banking, and the story of State Bank of India. So I was trying to combine all the 3 threads together. What was happening in India? Let's look at 1806, when SBI, the Bank of Bengal, was formed. Mind you, it is 50 years before 1857, the first war of independence. So it's as early as that, where it is not in the British Empire. It is the East India Company, which is creating a bank for the benefits of its officers and to facilitate business in Bengal. So it goes back, it was a time when the Maratha Empire was just declining. The third Anglo-Maratha War happened in 1818. So the Marathas are still quite powerful, but they're declining. And it was at that point in time that the bank begins its origins in Kolkata, which was then the Calcutta it became the Calcutta presidency, Bengal presidency. And so it is going back really into history, even before the British Empire was formally formed in 1857 after the First War of Independence. So I wanted to capture those moments in greater details.
Very right. But any special care, because after all, you were writing a book on a bank that people feel they know about, but of course they don't know really the nitty gritties and the history. But any special care that you took while writing a book on such an important subject?
Well, I had to just ensure that I was factually correct. And that was only, this book is not sponsored by State Bank. It was written by me and it was published by Amazon Westland. I think the SBI management was very, very clear. They said you can access all our material. And the only request they made was, please be factual. Don't put, anything which is not factual. So I ensured that all the facts I got, I also given that as a reference in my book, and just wanted to ensure that none of the things which I mentioned are misrepresented in any manner. But at the same time, the book, the research material which I had talks in very open terms about the way people objected to the nationalization, people objected to the forming of SBI, the kind of problems SBI faced. Some of the chairmen have written very candidly about some of the scams which took place, the way SBI transformed from not being so customer friendly to really making an effort to making the customer an important, the center of all its activities. So I think there was a lot of honesty which was displayed in SBI. And I hope that I've captured that in the book as well. So as I mentioned, it is not a critical analysis of SBI because that was not my intention. I'm not an economist or a stock market expert to look at SBI from that perspective. I wanted to write from a business historian's perspective of the journey of an entity and how it has moved over 200 years, and then looking ahead a little bit based on some of the interviews given by the current chairman and the ex-chairman of SBI.
Fantastic. And before I move ahead, I must tell everyone that there are three books to be won today in the conversation. And it'll be in a kind of a quiz on SBI. And if you've been hearing the conversation since the beginning, the first question definitely you'll be able to answer. So it's going to be like fastest finger first. Whosoever messages me personally on the answer first will get the book. So there are three books like this. So three questions during the course of the interview. So when was the Imperial Bank nationalized to form SBI? In fact, Imperial Bank was formed in 1921 after Bank of Bengal, Bank of Bombay, and Bank of Madras were merged. So when was it nationalized to form SBI? Mr. Pandey is okay. I've got the answer already. Yes,
Wow.
Sarushi, you are bang on. Thank you. I think you've been listening to the conversation very, very closely. Thank you.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that was pretty fun. Yeah, she wins your book. And Vikrant, no doubt the State Bank of India has been the bank for Indians. You've traced SBI's deep connection to the Indian economic progress and also how banking emerged in the last 2 centuries. And some people also say the perk of being a SBI customer is also that you don't lose any of your money. So what are your views on that?
Well, technically, a lot of people believe that the state bank is a sovereign guarantee, which is not the case in that sense. I mean, let's assume for a moment that, let's say for some very, very almost impossible reason that the State Bank of India fails and collapses, the government is not a guarantor to the deposit, except for the whatever is set up by the mandate from the RBI to give the deposit insurance corporation, which allows a certain part of the deposits to be protected. But because SBI is, while it is listed, it is still largely owned by the government of India. And because it's a government-owned bank and the way it functions, people very strongly believe that my money in SBI is safe. And that has always been the case. So there has never been a case where somebody lost his money. A lot of pensioners, a lot of army personnel, a lot of people from various government departments, their pension is routed through the State Bank of India. And they feel very comfortable that it is being managed by SBI, so that I can go and ensure that my money is always available. I can withdraw it whenever I want. And that gives a deep sense of comfort. I think the other comfort comes from the fact, and this was the origin of SBI as well, that, mind you, in 1955, when there was a debate about the Imperial Bank being nationalized, one of the major reasons was the fact that India needed, for a size of the country of India, and I think that that time the population must have been like 30, 35 crores, there were just a few hundred branches of all the banks put together. By then, the Swadeshi movement had created Punjab National Bank, Canara Bank, Bank of Baroda. Many such banks had come up. They were all private banks then, but they were servicing a very, very small percentage of the population in India, and we needed to have a bank which would go out and look at lending to agriculturists, lending to small businesses, medium-sized enterprises, shopkeepers, traders, craftsmen, and create a sense of a savings, habit. The only way to do that was to create a bank which would go out and open branches by not necessarily looking at whether each bank branch is going to be profitable on day one. That's the way a private bank looks at it. Why would I open a branch unless it is profitable? But SBI, because it was being mandated by the government, could afford to go out and create that structure. So it played a tremendous role in the growth of the economy of India itself, right? And mind you, 1955 is 7-8 years after independence, 1947. So it took a few years for the Minister of Finance to be able to convince the Parliament that we need to go for nationalization. And there were two options. You could have either created a bank completely from scratch, or you had an existing bank like Imperial Bank of India, and you nationalized that. So the decision, and the Nehruvian, that time that socialist angle was there in terms of creating large nationalized banks, steel plants, cement plants, oil refineries. I mean, those are the things which are coming up with the public sector era, which started off with the first planning commission. And SBI also was very clearly a part of that. And as you've seen over the last 55, 60 years, that has created a tremendous, reach, 24,000 plus branches. And mind you, even after that, and even after many other public sector banks, even today we find that there are millions of customers Indians who still are just getting into the banking, the habit. The Prime Minister Jan Dhan Yojana created a lot of accounts in the last 4-5 years, but even today the underbanked population is a very large number. So it's still a work in progress, even after SBI's tremendous efforts for more than half a century, and many of the public sector banks which are working towards that. So it really needs a very large, for a size of India, to have multiple such very big entities. But SBI undoubtedly continues to be the largest and the biggest in the country.
No doubt, as Mr. R.K. Talwar said, and you've quoted him in the book, that it is the biggest bank for the smallest man. I'll move on to interactive also, and come back to my questions, time permitting. Dia, will you like to please? Yeah, thank you, Dia. Can you switch on your video, please? Yes.
Hi. Yes. So it's great listening to you, since I'm very interested in the economic and business side of things, specifically in the business side. So I'm definitely going to be finishing this book. I was actually very interested and I had started reading already. So I have a few questions from my side, and I have one question from Mr. Deepak Kote. He is a career banker and has worked in a couple of international banks globally, and is currently working for one of the big fours in treasury consulting based in the Middle East. So he asks, non-performing assets are expected to surge post-pandemic. Whilst private sector has to manage itself, there appears to be an implicit comfort amongst the banks of the government coming to their rescue no matter what. Does this not result in the state-run bank being less innovative and actively be prepared for such events than have a comfort from the government? And if a private sector bank can and should be allowed to fail, why not a state-run bank? After all, why should the taxpayers pay for the inefficiently run banks, be it public or private?
Okay. I was anticipating this question, so I'd put that caveat in the beginning that my book was not really an attempt to do a critical analysis of SBI. This is a question a lot of people ask me. And, frankly, a lot of ex-chairmen of SBI have also written about it. In fact, the chairman who just retired has also written a book which does talk about the NPAs. I think one of the things, you will appreciate that SBI being the largest lender in India, by default becomes either leading the consortium or part of the consortium, which is lending to a very large project. SBI invariably finds itself as a part of that. And to be fair, I mean, if you look at some of the so-called scams, and I'm talking more about what you and I read in newspapers, there are banks like the Punjab National Bank and some of the other banks, public sector banks, which got embroiled in that. You do find that SBI does not figure, or at least the SBI chairman do not, figure in the cases being handled by ED or from the government. The question, should the government allow public sector banks to fail? I think it's about corporate governance rather than allowing to fail. And I was talking to some of the board members of SBI, and SBI, I'm quite happy to note, has a board which is very strong, and a fairly large number of independent members who do voice their opinion in the board meetings quite strongly. And these are people who would not join the board unless they're allowed to have that. They're not like rubber stamp just coming and attending board meetings and going away. So yes, the NPA today is a significant portion. A large part of that is borrowing, lendings to various projects which are also supported by the government. To answer the question, no, I don't think some of these banks should be allowed to fail, but the corporate governance should become stronger and stronger, make them more available to public in terms of the way the equity structure is the equity structured, and make the directors really independent so that they can actually question and ensure that the bank performs as well as a private bank without forgetting its aspect of social sector lending and many of the lending which a bank like SBI does, which probably an ICICI Bank or a Kotak Mahindra Bank or an Axis Bank could either refuse or participate in a very small manner.
Thank you. We have Mr. Sushil Poddar. He's the Income Tax Commissioner, Bombay. And he's also the author of a fantastic book, which he's written along with Mrs. Nidhi Poddar on Blaze. Sushil ji, welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vikrant. I must congratulate you for having authored this not very common book. And I believe this must be a very pleasant read for all of us. Coming to your book, what I can see, I have not read your book. I wish to read this in days to come. But from a psychological point of view, what I see, the journey of SBI and journey of India go hand in hand. 200 years, and the crucial 200 years. Now, this SBI came into being, as you were just telling just now, just before 15 years before 1857 revolt. And that was the time the nationalistic fervor of India was rising. And finally, it culminated into 1947, when we got independence. Now, India, if you take the case of India for 200 years, there was a central cohesive factor, converging factor, and that was, nationalism, national flag, national anthem. And there we used to converse, all countrymen used to converse together. What was in SBI for 200 years, which has let it survive for 200 years, there must have been some cohesive factor in the whole working culture of this company. While writing this book, did you come across this type of cohesive factor?
I think very, very interesting question. So I'll go back a few steps from SBI to Imperial Bank and from Imperial Bank to the Presidency Bank, going backwards. Now, one of the things the Imperial Bank created very well, and even today, when you look at the SBI probationary officer system, lakhs and lakhs of people even today aspire to become an SBI probationary officer. It is considered a tough exam. There is a very rigorous selection, and the person who joins as a probationary officer, in fact, most chairmen of SBI have joined as probationary officers and then risen to the level of chairman of SBI. So it allows a very meritorious system for a PO, probationary officer, to join at an entry level and rise up to the CMD, the chairman of the bank. And this was started by the Imperial Bank. The Imperial Bank created this probationary officer system. Of course, they were very, very British in their approach, that they did not allow many Indians to participate, as was the case with many British companies that time in India, that they were very, very, very racist. And then when you go back a step before that, you find that the presidency banks also were very racist in nature. But some of the good things they did, for example, way back in 1840, even before the first war of independence, you find that the presidency banks of Bengal and then the Bank of Bombay and Bank of Madras were created. They were extremely meticulous in their documentation. When I looked at the archives, I could get balance sheets and annual reports and board meeting minutes being maintained for the last 170 years. So the meticulousness by which they were documenting this has been the backbone. They had created an audit mechanism. That time, mind you, this was even before the telegraph came into India, the post and telegraph. So in the 1830s, 1840s, they were ensuring that the documentation, the information is being exchanged between different branches so that there are no frauds. There is some method of control. And SBI took a lot of these practices, which are there for 200 years, into making it a very efficient bank, something which allowed it to control and ensure that scams or frauds were very few in between. The nationalistic fervor, sir, really came into place after 1955 when SBI was formed as a bank owned by the government of India. And it really spread extremely fast, where the focus on agriculture, the focus on small business. SBI was the first bank where, when corporate social responsibility today, with the Government of India Act, the CSR is a mandatory thing. But SBI was doing corporate social responsibility, helping ex-convicts, prisoners who have been released now, to give them jobs or give them loans, which normally most banks will not touch. Backward people from the society being given jobs or loans. Small traders, small businessmen whose credit was not very good. Refinancing NABARD, refinancing, agricultural institutions to ensure that the farmers got the loan. Those are the kind of things SBI did, which was not necessarily a part of its mandate, but because they believed, and as you rightly said, it's a story of India from 1806 to 2022. And SBI, you will see at each step, was playing a role. Even the Bank of Bombay, the presidency banks, the boom which took place in textile in Bombay in the early 1900, just before when the World War, the cotton crisis in America, the textile mills came up. Bank of Bombay was there at the forefront to ensure that a lot of these business and Parsi businessmen got loans. So at each point, you find that there was a support from a business, and then after SBI, to a common man, which is what the R.K. Talwar, the first the employee of SBI, to become a chairman at the young age of 45. As he said, it is the largest bank for the smallest man. And that really has been, even the logo has been designed, which a lot of one of the interpretations of the logo is about the common man in the center and SBI all around to ensure that it is giving all the support. Some people call it like a keyhole. That is it's a indicator of strength and guarantee and surety. But even the logo was designed keeping in mind that it is the common man is always in the focus.
I wish SBI promotes this book internationally. It is going to benefit them only, because it will allow them to have international footprints more significantly through this book, because it's a history of 200 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you, Sushilji, for taking out time from your busy schedule. I have my second question of the quiz related to the logo that we were just discussing. If you answer even one part right, I'll give you the book. So when did SBI adopt the logo of this keyhole design we just discussed? Or you can also tell me who designed this logo. Any of these answers, answer to me directly, and I will give you the book. So in the meantime, Dia, you can, I have not received any answer as yet, but maybe you can still go ahead with the question that you have from Vishali Nagpal.
Yes. So yes, I had a question from Vishali Nagpal. So a part of this you've actually already answered. So her question was that what motive, major objective did you have in mind all throughout while writing the book? And what intrigued you the most when you were actually writing it?
So, as I mentioned, I was telling Neeta in the beginning, having worked in various large corporations and most of my time also in financial services, I was very keen to understand how Indian banking evolved, because the story of SBI, and as Sushilji was also mentioning, is a story of India and a story of how banking in India evolved. What was the way somebody was banking in when the first war of independence took place? Where did a businessman go for loans? Where could a person save money? And the presidency banks very clearly were focused on large businessmen and the British East India officials. They're not really focusing on a common man. The common man still had to look at moneylenders or small private, banks which are very, very at a very local level, which would charge high rates of interest. So I was also keen to understand how was a customer treated. And my book talks a lot about anecdotes from the presidency bank days where a common man, mind you, a current account in 1840, you had to keep a deposit of 500 rupees to open a current account. 500 rupees at that time is like almost equivalent of many, many lakhs today, just to open a current account. And after that, you can borrow money from the bank and do your transactions. So very clearly, the presidency banks were not looking at a social cause. They were just for profit. They wanted to ensure that they are supporting rich European business houses, especially in Calcutta and in Bombay. It was the largely Parsi businessmen who were running the cotton trade, the opium trade, textiles. They were not really focusing on the common man. So I was very keen to understand how did the banking in India evolve? What sort of Swadeshi movement got created when Lala Lajpat Rai set up Punjab National Bank? There was the Canara Bank being formed in the south. The Maharaja of Sayajirao Gaikwad formed the Bank of Baroda in Gujarat. So I was trying to answer this question about India, story of India, the story of banking, and through it, the thread of the State Bank of India, as it was the case with the Presidency Bank and the Imperial Bank, and how it moved over the centuries, different government acts coming into play, how did that affect banking and the State Bank, and how was eventually formed. And even after formation of it, SBI, a very different part of its journey begins, which is about really now committing to creating Indian economy. And how over the last 50, 60 years, SBI has done that. So those were some of the questions I was trying to answer when I wrote the book. I wanted to ensure that the book was very simple to read, that there were no jargons, because I wanted any common man to pick up the book and be able to enjoy the narrative rather than, writing about some balance sheets or about liabilities or how the monetary policies or the Reserve Bank of India policies have affected business or banking, business in general and banking in particular. I didn't want to get into that part. So I have very consciously kept away from those things while writing the book.
Yeah, I have the answer from Mr. Deepak Kote. He said that it is 1979 when the SBI adopted the logo, which is very right. And Shekhar Kamath, incidentally, is the designer who designed the logo from NID Ahmedabad. Anything that you would like to talk about it? Something more that you would like to share
Yes,
about the
Neeta.
logo?
There was, there's a misconception. I mean, I like those of you who are listening to me. If you look at a Google Earth map, and you look at Kankaria Lake in Ahmedabad, the Kankaria Lake is very, very similar to the SBI logo. And a lot of people have a mistaken assumption that the SBI logo, because Satish Kamath from NID Ahmedabad designed the logo, that it was an inspiration from Kankaria Lake, which is I'm told it's not true. But yes, there's a very uncanny resemblance. If you look at the Google map of Kakaria Lake and the way the SBI logo has been designed. Yes, but there are multiple interpretations. Mr. Talwar, who was the chairman, also has given his own interpretations of what the logo stands for. I like the keyhole aspect because I feel that it is like कि आपका खजाना जो है वो SBI के साथ सुरक्षित है, and it denotes sort of a trust and confidence and security. But people look at it in various ways about the blue circle and the person in the center. So there are multiple ways by which one could look at the logo. Each person, yes.
I would say one of the most prominent logos that you come across, and so many quizzes they ask you which logo, which bank. Yes, I have Asha Dhaima. She wants to ask a question directly. She's a very senior educator and very regular on our platform. Yes, Asha, thank you for joining in. Yes.
Hello, Mr. Vikrant. My question is, it's very present times relevant question. The digitization that we are seeing, the e-banking that has become so popular, prevalent over last few years, especially after demonetization, it must have changed the functioning and manpower and a lot of nature of functioning of banking, right? So in your account, in your book, account of banking and SBI particularly, I would like to know how important, how significant is this particular chapter, digitalization or e-banking or internet banking, how important turning point it is in overall banking system?
Oh, absolutely. Wonderful question. Before I answer that, I just want to give you India is multiple Indias at the same time. While you find today a Google Pay or UPI interface which the government has very beautifully created, where even a small vendor, I can buy bananas for 10 rupees and I can just pay him with a QR code. I don't really need to exchange cash. It is becoming extremely popular. There are multiple Indias which exist in India at the same time. As I was mentioning in the beginning, even today there's a large underbanked population which still does not have a bank account. And the Prime Minister's efforts in the last 4 or 5 years have created millions of accounts, but there's still millions of people who are yet to get into the banking system. At the same time, you find at the other end, the SBI's YONO app, you only need one, YONO app, has a valuation of, I don't know the latest valuation, but something like 24 or $30 billion independently, though it's a part of SBI. If it were to get listed independently, it would have a valuation which is almost equivalent of the valuation of the State Bank of India, which shows that the SBI YONO app is also very, very popular. To answer your question specifically, the digitalization, e-banking, internet banking is becoming extremely popular. I mean, many of us would not have visited a bank branch for unless there is a very specific need. But there are still millions of people who go to make their daily deposits. There are people who go for getting their current account. They might withdraw money from the bank. While there are ATMs now, there are pensioners who go to the bank because they feel the comfort that there is a physical entity which they can go to and withdraw money. So India, with 135 crore population, undoubtedly internet banking, the electronic transaction which is happening today with Google Pay, with the UPI interface, with Paytm and all these which are playing a big role, is allowing the banks to make the job of a customer very easy. Banking, if you look at it for last 500 years or 800 years, they perform three simple functions. You take money from people, you give money to people, and you enable transactions. That's it. These are the three functions a bank does. But the complexities involved in technology, and I'm quite happy to note that actually I interact with SBI and Bank of Baroda as two of the public sector banks, apart from some accounts I have with a private bank. I find that in terms of the security, the public sector banks are actually very careful to ensure that, it's not just with one password or one customer ID that you can do your transactions. It might look a little irritating at times that they ask for one more OTP or one more password for a particular transaction, but it is just to ensure that you don't get cheated, because today with internet banking, one of the biggest problems a lot of people are facing is in terms of their money being looted by, there are calls which come and they ask you for some OTP. But if you look at some of the public sector banks, SBI, Bank of Baroda, and some of the others, they have one more level of control, which ensures that it will not be as easy. So internet banking is becoming very important, but the other India is about just having a bank account, starting to save money, to transfer money from Agartala to Ahmedabad. And today, even that process is still a work in progress, and it's going to continue for the next 15, 20 years, I suppose. So multiple Indias exist at the same time. And I think a bank like SBI, and the reason I mentioned the YONO app is because the YONO app has apparently more than 150 vendors, which are all on the single app. And I believe lakhs of transactions happen on that every day. And while SBI caters to a pensioner, 80-year-old pensioner who goes to the bank branch to withdraw his money and have a cup of tea with the bank manager and feel comfortable that his money is safe. So all these exist at the same time.
Rightly said, sir. Other India. This other India word is actually very intriguing. How big is that India, other India, our India, or some middle level Indias? I agree completely with you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Asha. One quiz question is remaining, which I'll ask, and thereafter, you can ask the balanced questions that you have found. The question is, you see, I have to tell you that there is a SBI branch which opened at Rashtrapati Bhavan last year. And you know who was the first customer? That was the President of India, Ramnath Kovindji. So if you just give me the name of the month when it was opened, it opened for the first time at Rashtrapati Bhavan last year, I'll give you the book. So I'll wait for your reply. You can chat, you can send it to me directly on the chat. In the meantime, Dia, please unmute yourself. Yeah. Yes.
Yes. So like we were talking about, well, a turning point in the last question, I would just like to ask, of course, the system has evolved over the years. So according to you, what system of process of doing things do you think was a major change or turning point?
Sorry, your voice got a little cut in between. Diya, can you just repeat that? What did change?
Sorry, I think.
Can you repeat your question, please? Yeah.
Yes. So I was just asking, according to you, what was the major change or turning point in the way of doing things in the systems along the years?
The turning point for the bank? You mean how SBI changed from
Yes.
over the last? Yeah. So, I think one of the first changes, and D.N. Ghosh, who was the chairman of SBI, before that he was the joint secretary in the Ministry of Finance, who looked at the nationalization, where Indira Gandhi nationalized 14 banks and made them public sector banks like the Canara Bank, Vijaya Bank, Indian Bank, Bank of Punjab National Bank. All these banks were nationalized in 1969. And D.N. Ghosh, one of the major roles he played was in terms of computerization of SBI. And some of the people who are attending today, would be probably employees of the bank when they would have realized how nationalization was opposed in the 70s, because a lot of people felt that it would remove jobs, it will make people jobless. And as we see now, and as the previous question, today we find that technology is not removing jobs, but just making the customers much easier. So one was a nationalization where, the bank manager or the clerks would sit after the closing time at 4 o'clock till 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and making all entries from the ledger. Then came some computerization, then computer systems. Now we have ATMs where the customer himself is doing the transaction on behalf of the customer, entering the data and withdrawing money. So a lot of these changes have happened over the last, today it's internet banking, now it's on the app. So the app makes it even much easier to do multiple transactions which are not even thought about. You could order a checkbook, can change your address, you can create a nominee, you can do so many things on the app. So as we see going forward, and now with UPI interface, even money transaction, it happens directly. You go to a shopkeeper, you buy something using a QR code from your account, the money gets directly credited to his account. So all these are now happening at a very rapid pace. It's important for the bank to ensure that while they will never be able to catch up with technology, and banks deliberately don't catch up with technology because they have to ensure that there is enough checks and balances before we adopt some new technology, because it is affecting a common man. It's affecting the money which a common man has given to the bank. You can't afford to have technologies which will expose the customer to getting hacked or some fraud by which his money gets transferred to some other account without his or her knowledge. So technology plays an important role, but banks ensure that those technologies are robust. And to that extent, you'll find that banking system would be a little bit behind when it comes to some of the technologies which are being adopted by many other businesses. But at the same time, there's a very clear transition happening over the last 50 years from simple computerization, data entry, to ATMs, to internet banking, to apps, and now transactions happening or various other apps which are outside the banking system, like a Paytm app or a Google Pay app, which is not a part of it's not an SBI app. It is outside the banking system, and yet it is helping one part of the banking activity, which is transactions, to happen seamlessly. So a lot of these you see over the last, especially over the last 7-8 years, happening very, very rapidly.
Thank you, Dia. The answer for the last question was 24th July 2021, and the book is Ritu Kher. She gave the answer correctly, and this was written by this has been opened by President Ramnath Kovind. So there's so many facts in the book which one reads and one finds out. So is there any thoughts about writing another book, perhaps based on the similar lines, or maybe some other bank, or maybe the kind of response you've been getting on this book? So
Oh yes, absolutely.
Already giving you some more ideas?
Yes, as I mentioned in the beginning, business history is something which I really enjoy. And when I translated the Tata book, and I was very enamored because I got the award. The SBI book also, again, while it was a little serendipitous in terms of its discovery, was something which I was passionate because I want to combine my knowledge of having worked in large businesses for 25 years and now wearing the hat of a historian, to try and combine and tell stories about businesses, how they have survived or how they have grown or how they have become. So one of the projects I was evaluating in Gujarat was about companies which have survived for 5th or 6th generation. In Gujarat, there are some businesses which have been around for 70 to 100 years. And what makes businesses survive? Because if you look at the survival rate of a family-owned business into the 3rd generation, it's in single digits, 7 or 8%, or less than that, 4%. What makes businesses survive for 5 or 6 generations? At the same time, I'm talking to 1 or 2, again, very large businesses which want to tell their story of, while they are extremely successful, many people do not know the failures, the decisions, the discussions which took place, which got this company to its leadership level. So some people have approached me to also consider, and I've been talking to some of the promoters to look at this. So business history is something which I enjoy, while at the same time, my book, the travelogue on Ramayana, now it's being made into a travel serial with a very large OTT producer, has also given me ideas to look at something what I call as a mytho travelogue, where we combine travel with mythology. And me and my co-author there, Nilesh Kulkarni, who wrote the book with me, we are also considering some such similar aspects. So I am looking at multiple. I did a very interesting work for Storytel, which is an audiobook company, where in April they're going to release 25 episodes of the entire Maratha history, which I wrote from 1600 just at the time of Shivaji's birth till 1857, covering around 2.5 centuries of how the Marathas were really in power, and especially after the Third Battle of Panipat, how they again rose and became the single largest power in India. People don't know much about it. Having translated a lot of Marathi historical fiction, which is about Sambhaji, Shivaji, Aurangzeb, Rao Bajirao Mastani, it gave me an idea that why not write in a very simple language the story of the history of the Marathas. So that's also coming out in an audiobook form, not in a print form, which will be with Storytel, which will be launched in April. So these are some of the projects I'm working on right now.
Fantastic. And given the fact that you've been writing with so much of passion, I'm sure your future books will also create as much of buzz as your present books are creating. One last question from Arushi Roy, which you've answered partly, but still. He says that I would love to know the writing process with so much of factual information. How did you organize the plethora of information? I know you've answered a bit of it, but
yes, Anushi,
some facts we missed out. Yeah.
So I wanted to keep the narrative in mind, that the narrative was about the history of India at the background, the history of banking in general, and in that the history of the State Bank of India, the Presidency Bank, the Imperial Bank in particular. So I wanted to ensure that all the three threads are together, so that when the reader is reading the book, he gets a sense of a linear narrative from 1806 to 2022. At the same time, a lot of interesting facts which are not very directly connected to the strong narrative, but which was something which I didn't want to miss. I put them in the footnotes so that the reader gets a chance to enjoy those footnotes, but at the same time, it doesn't break the narrative of the story which I'm telling. So I try to combine both, and you will find that a lot of these footnotes are very interesting because they capture some very interesting aspects of what was happening in India at that point in time. While it may not be directly relevant to the history of banking or history of SBI, but it was a very important event which I wanted to ensure that it is mentioned partly. So combining historical fact, but without making it boring. So I wanted to write only those facts where there was a story behind it. And I hope that it comes across as a good story to read and not make it into a dull historical book. Unfortunately, many of our history books in childhood used to be very just full of facts. Ye saal mein ye hua, ye saal mein ye hua. And that becomes very boring. So I wanted to see that there is a story behind that date or a particular event. And that's what makes the narrative interesting.
That's very interesting because one can find out so much of information, and it's really a fact-heavy book as well, but written in a very interesting style. So thank you so much. Anything that we missed out you would like to tell the viewers on the book? I know it's everybody.
Read the book with a sense of pride and curiosity about what India is about, the history of banking, and how one of India's foremost companies in any field, and obviously the largest bank, globally also one of the biggest banks, how it has evolved. And it will give a very good sense of understanding of, how the Presidency Bank days, the Imperial Bank days, it will be a fascinating tour of 2 centuries. I'm sure people will enjoy that.
Thank you so much, Vikrant, for writing such a wonderful journey of SBI from the colonial period to the re-emergence of India's economy of global consequence. It is definitely a must read for everyone and who wants to know about subjects which brought our nation together, and it is wonderfully written. So thank you for joining us today, and thank you everyone, and congratulations once again to the winners of this fantastic book, Ritu Kher, Deepak Kot, and Arushi Rai. That's fantastic. You would love reading this book. And in the end, I must request everyone to please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Trends Literature Series. You'll find a lot of interactions which will be of value to you. And you will come to know about so many fantastic authors like Mr. Vikrant